Right, well, I'll take a cocking cam in the front part, make sure that's cocked completely, release it, and as I run that cam back down the other way, the shutter did close. I lift that and keep running that back. The shutter is running down, the self timer was set by the sounds of it. Let's try that again. So the shutter action is very, very sticky, certainly needed to be serviced, but does appear to work. Fully cocked. It doesn't want to run slow, the blades are oily. Down to the closed position. The capping plate would have lifted up at this stage, allowing the rack to move, continue moving. It continues moving. Shutter fires, attempts to close, closes. That's it. So the main fault here, the main original fault most likely that caused someone to go into the front of the camera and make a mess of putting everything back where it came from. But the main cause of the camera not working was that the shutter needs to be serviced. And that's probably a good thing to find, because it looks pretty obvious to me that that's a good clean will probably put everything right. Everything will have to come out of the body anyway, because I stripped them right down as part of the service. But our main culprit was the shutter. Its faults are the typical faults of any leaf blade shutter that hasn't been serviced for a decade or 5, and that'll be oily blades and gummy oils and greases and things of that nature. Regardless of all that, it should clean up very well and go back, and we should have a working camera. The only aspect I'm a bit concerned about was the state of those 3 screws that held the front control rings in place. One of them was very damaged and I'll have to replace that. Of the other 2, one of them slightly damaged. I'll show you what I'll do about that later. I've got this body pretty much stripped down now, ready for cleaning. And now one odd feature here is this shield at the base. That's very off square. I don't know if that shows well on the camera, but it's very off square, which suggests to me that someone was poking and prodding in at the back of the camera, because that's really quite twisted. I'll certainly have to push that back into shape. Apart from that, nothing much to note about the body. The 3 screws that held the film advance shaft in, they were all loose. The problem with the screws coming loose there, well, there's multiple problems, but one of them is if one of the screws does come loose, it'll manage to jam up the film advance quite efficiently. So it's that certainly needed to be attended to. Anyway, clean all these bits up. I've got the body stripped down and clean now. That's pretty much ready for reassembly at this stage. I haven't removed any of the control levers for the mirror and capping plate. They all appear to be functioning correctly, no sign of stickiness or anything there. One thing I noticed while I was dealing with this was that the return spring on the film release lever here is broken, or in some other way unhooked from where it should be. And that would explain the weird behaviour of the film advance. You may remember that I had to press the shutter release repeatedly and press the rewind button and wiggle the advance lever before I was able to move the advance lever each time. This would be the answer. This release lever was just flopping around instead of moving correctly. So I will have to replace the spring on that lever, and I hope to do that without having to take the whole thing out of the body, because the settings will be lost. So I can just push that up out of the way and replace that spring. We'll find out what's wrong with it. It might just be misshapen. The camera's obviously got a bit of a history. Perhaps somebody's bent it out of shape for some reason. Well, that spring was indeed broken, so I've got to take this whole arm out in order to replace that spring easily. Now the adjustment screw here adjusts the point at which the film release lever releases the film advance as you press the shutter release. So I don't want to disturb that setting, so what I'm going to do is use some calipers to measure the width between the bottom of the lever and the top of that screw. 40.15 millimeters. And when I put it back together, I'll set it to the same distance, and hopefully I'll be pretty close. I have the lever removed now, and I have another spring. So I've got to see if I can fit this spring in place. That appears to be correct. Now I can reassemble the arm to the body. The spring seems a little bit over enthusiastic. I'm just going to check the shape of that. Yes, that feels better. And the spring and the screw that goes on the top of that arm has to go here. Of course it just pops off, but it would do. Let's get that in place. Normally you have to be much more careful working in the body because you have the mirror here waiting to gather up fingerprints. But fortunately I've taken the mirror out for cleaning, so I haven't got that hazard waiting for me. Right. That's all in place. Now all I need to do is run the screw back in place. I've taken the cover plate off the top here so that I can get access with a screwdriver. This is one of those jobs where having 3 or 4 hands would be handy. No, screw started, that's good. Let's just pop that whole thing back out of the way and check it with my calipers. That's just about right. Just need a little bit more, I think, than that. A little bit more. That's it. That matches. So now that lever can be swung back into position. That spring's just popped off out of place again. Alright, back where I started, it's off its post. Bugger. I'm going to start work on this shutter now, stripping it down and servicing it. Once it's all done, I'll mate it back up with the camera body. First I'm unscrewing the shutter release arm that releases the mirror and capping plate, and also releases the shutter itself here. I can get this unhooked from the body, that's better. This lever here releases the shutter itself. I've got a joint here I've got to unsolder. This little buffer here, it's just a piece of leather by the looks of it, and it's just for the mirror to come up against. I expect the shutter's been serviced before. It's certainly old enough that it should have been serviced at least once. The screw was very tight. These components are quite sticky with dried grease. I was looking for a washer on the back of that little cam and it was present, so that's good. I'll loosen and remove the 4 screws, and then I'll go and unsolder that flash sync wire. Then the shutter assembly should come off the front panel. Right, go and deal with that wire. And 3 screws hold the shutter to the front of the shutter housing, with a lens mount really. Lift it off. It's the coupling for the meter. And that little pinion couples to the wheels on the front of the control wheels on the front of the shutter. I noticed that was quite stiff to get off. This little pinion couples to the ring that opens the diaphragm all the way open. That's just a ball bearing there for the detent for the shutter speeds. The cover plate. And the lens mount itself, which is a little bit dirty, certainly needs to be cleaned. Pop those to one side. Here's the shutter. First thing I need to do is remove the retainer ring from the front. Just hook into that with my tweezers, lift the retainer ring off. The shutter speed cam, the setting cam. This latch holds the shutter in the cocked position. Off with that main ring. Main drive spring for the shutter. I'll remove the retard gear train. The self-timer or the delay action. Flash sync control gear. It also latches the main drive spring in the latched position, the cocked position. Shutter release lever. Unhook this spring. And more delicate stuff. Make sure I don't lose the springs. And hook this one. This one here I need a screwdriver to take that, unscrew that post. The B lever can come off next. I'm a bit reluctant. Let's see if we open it. Let's remove the screw holding the bracket for the spring for the main drive cam. Remove that bracket, remove the cam, slide the shutter into the open position, allow me to get the B lever off and retrieve the spring. The B lever spring so that I don't lose it. And that shutter is well on the way to being stripped down. From the back, 3 screws. A lot of these screws are very tight, unusually so. setting lever for the flash sync speeds of the self timer. Three screws hold the mechanism plate and the shutter case together. Can you see any of this? Probably not. Right, here's our mechanism plate and blades. There's 6 blades in this shutter, one of them is a cover blade. 2 more screws hold the lens tube to the mechanism plate. Take the lens tube off. And that's the blade actuating ring there that swings the blades in and out. And that is the shutter in pieces. And now I can clean all these components up and reassemble it. The first phase in putting the shutter back together is putting the blade actuating ring and the lens tube back on the mechanism plate. A few threads of cotton there from the cleaning. Swing the detent back over the post on the blade actuating ring. Put the lens tube in position. Make sure that pallet is not trapped underneath. It's not sitting down correctly. It's better. There are 3 screws that hold the lens tube to the mechanism plate. One of them is longer than the other 2, and that's because it has to pass through the bracket that holds the spring for the main drive cam. So don't mix them up, because if you mix them up you'll end up with a screw sticking out through the mechanism plate, which will foul the shutter blades. Just checking here, yeah, that screws down below the surface, so is that one. I don't put the third one in place at this stage because it stops me from being able to install the main drive cam. That's all good. That plate needs to be lubricated lightly with some graphite powder, which I'll just do now.